I can hear
Um,
you. I'll pause
eh,
there. Okay.
yes, can I have just 2 minutes for me to officially introduce you and then I will hand over to you in like 2 minutes.
Please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning again, everybody, and welcome to the Research Capacity Development Unit at the University of Johannesburg, the Postgraduate School. So my name is Koke Zobila, and I will be your moderator today. And please allow me to start off by thanking all our attendees for taking your time to join us today on this session on public speaking. And most importantly, I would like to thank our presenter, Professor David Robinson, for his effort in preparing and giving this presentation. And before I officially hand over to Prof. David, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules and some important information. And so for the housekeeping rules, if you do have questions during the presentation, please raise your hand if you would like to speak or type your question on the chat box. I will then indicate to the presenter to address your question, and the recording link for the session and the presentation slides will be uploaded on our Moodle community by the end of the week. And a feedback survey will be sent out during the session on the chat box. May we please request that you fill the survey out for us to gain some insight on whether this workshop was useful and how we can improve in the future. And I will then introduce to you our presenter, Professor David Robinson, by reading out his bio. So Professor David Robinson is an associate professor in the Department of Education and Curriculum Studies in the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg. Prof. David has several tertiary qualifications, BA, HDE, PG, B.Ed honors, and B.Ed and Masters in Education, and PhD, all from VETS. So Prof. David has been involved in education for more than 35 years. Initially, he was involved at secondary school level as English teacher, head of department, deputy principal, and headmaster. Thereafter, he became employed at tertiary level. He is in his 20th year at UJ, where his main focus is preparing English teachers at UJ. His main area of research is in the field of English literature. Presented papers at local and international conferences and has published in local and international publications. Prof. David has written study guides for the Margaret Organization and has co-authored English home language textbooks published by Pearson for secondary schools. Prof. David has worked at all levels, first year to fourth year, of undergraduate teaching and learning in the field of education. He has taught on honors programs and has supervised master's and doctoral students. Prof. David served as a head of department at UJ from June 2019 to August 2022. He serves on committees in the Faculty of Education, and he also serves on two editorial boards of journals that are linked to the Scopus platform. For more than a decade, he served on the Council of English Academy of Southern Africa. And without any wasting any more time, I hand over to Professor David Robinson. Over to you, Prof. I'll stop sharing so you can share from your side.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that detailed and generous introduction. I have a set of slides which I will share now. Um, I think that once I start sharing, I will not be able to see the chat and I won't see hands up. But um, thanks for the colleague who said that she will manage that process once we get into it. So I'm going to share my slides. There are several slides. I hope that you find them useful. So let me look at my slides. Okay. As you can see, my topic today is public speaking, and I also give my location in University of Johannesburg. So I'm in the Department of Education and Curriculum Studies. So I will start moving through the slides. I will try to be not long-winded about each slide. So let us start. Some people think that public speaking is no longer such a big process or significant process, but as you will see in my first slide, which comes now, there is significance in public speaking. If anyone questions the value of effective public speaking, just think about the debate between two men who were contesting the election in the USA earlier this year. The result of the debate resulted in President Biden deciding to step down as a candidate for the Democratic Party in the USA. And that has effectively ended President Biden's career as a politician. So the effects or results of public speaking can therefore be very serious. So if anyone says that public speaking is not so important, just direct them to that debate and the consequences of that debate. So that is something that we must recognize, because public speaking and debating have the possibility of great consequences. And my introduction is located in 2024 and its current affairs in a sense. So it relates to the world in which we live. And the president of the USA is a significant role on our planet. So public speaking has a significance in terms of the consequences of engaging in debate. So I will move to the next slide. In this Teams contact session today, I will address several points that relate to public speaking. The first elements will to present a series of slides, and then I will comment on the ideas that are presented. I will try not to simply read the slides, because you could do that in your own time. I will try to add commentary on the ideas, and I will welcome any questions or comments from the online audience. And I hope that you find this presentation to be of value. So let's look at the organization of the acknowledgement of sources. I've used two sources about this presentation. The first one is from 2019, Simon Sebag, Montefiore, and his book, Voices of History, Speeches That Changed the World. That book is interesting because it starts with a series of speeches that took place many years ago, but also addresses the modern world. So he comments on speeches by people from the ancient world, but he also speaks about people like Donald Trump. And then there's great speeches of the 20th century, edited by Tom Clark. And that book has a series of speeches, and each speech is introduced by an academic or a specialist in the field of history and speech making. Um, so, and that is 20th century information. And it's useful because there's also a website linked to that book, and you can actually listen to recordings of the speeches. I find those two books to be very helpful, and I acknowledge their contribution to this speech or this presentation. So let's look at the organization of the slides. So there are various ideas that will be presented. Some of them follow a process of time-related matters. For example, the early slides will address the initial elements of a speech, such as the greeting, and then the later slides will address the later elements of the speech, for example, the conclusion. There will also be some matters that do not relate to the time-related elements of the public speech. For example, the use of humor and the use of quotations. They could take place at any time in a speech. So I'll address those topics as well. And that is how the slides are organized. So the early elements of a speech will be addressed early in my presentation, but some elements will simply be introduced irrespective of time-related matters. So let's look at the greeting. So Simon Sebag Montefiore makes the point that the first greeting from the speaker to the audience or crowd who are there to listen sets up the tone and the expectations. And he says you can tell much by the opening of a speech. And he gives several examples, and I will show you some of the examples, some of the people from history, some people more recent. So this is an example from Elizabeth I, who was the Queen of England, and she would greet people by saying, "My loving people." And that's an interesting greeting because it affirms the positive relationship between the people and the queen who rules them. And that's an interesting opening because it suggests that there's a positive relationship between the ruler and the people. And we will look at another person who we all know. The next example, Nelson Mandela. He used to start his greetings in public, comrades and friends. And this greeting is another affirmation of a positive relationship. Um, the word comrades is a celebration of uh, being connected to each other in a purpose, and also the word friends um, affirms the positive relationship. So that's something to think about. And then we've got another example, Michelle Obama. She, when she speaks to schoolgirls, she refers to them as future leaders of the world. That is a greeting that is a very positive greeting because it affirms the value of the audience in terms of them being seen as the future leaders of the world. And it's also important that the audience here, there is schoolgirls, and Michelle Obama is emphasizing the future possibilities of leadership of the schoolgirls. And that, I think, is a very positive thing. I'm going to now move on to another example, another American example, and you will see what this figure says. This is Donald Trump, and that photograph is his formal portrait from 2017, I believe. And he says, wow, whoa, that's some group of people, thousands. And if you look at his expression, he is emphasizing the um, the emotional element, almost like surprise in his greeting, and his reference to thousands is an indication of how many people are present to listen to him speak. It's almost as if he is emphasizing um, his own popularity through saying there are thousands of people here to listen to him speak. So those are several examples from the greetings that people have. And I think some of them are very important in terms of setting up the relationship with the audience. So let us move on to the next slide. So the greeting or opening is all about defining the relationship, the terms of contract, contact, and compact between speaker and audience. So if we look at those words, contract, contact, and compact, the word contract is the way in which people engage with each other. It's almost as if you set out the rules of engagement. Contact is the way in which people engage. And then the word compact is another word for pact, which would be agreement. So that's what the greeting is all about. The speaker sets up an expectation about the agreement of the relationship between the speaker and the people who are attending this speech. So let us move to the next point or the next slide. If we look at the rules of presenting a speech, we find this from Simon Sebag Montefiore. He says, and this is a quote from him, "It must be short without glibness, substantial without ennui, powerful without haughtiness, dramatic without contrivance, confident without bombast, intimate without condescension, emotional without melodrama, courageous without bravado, beautiful without artifice." And he also talks about other elements relating to speeches. In the next few slides, I will look at some of the statements that he puts forward as rules for speaking in public. I won't interrogate all of the statements because that would take us quite a long time, but I will address a few and let us see how we go. So if we look at some of his statements, he says it must be short without glibness. So in other words, the speech should be short, but without being superficial. One of the problems with shortness is that if you present a speech that it is so short that it lacks substance, it can appear facile. So when he says it must be short without glibness, he's focusing on the idea that we should be concise and not use many words that are unnecessary. But at the same point, the word glibness suggests superficiality. So he says, make a speech short, but make it be short, but with substance so that it's not facile or superficial. That's an important thing when one thinks about the shortness of a speech. Shortness could be insubstantial. So we have to be careful about balancing shortness with substance. He also says a speech should be substantial without ennui. And ennui is about boredom. So he says a speech should be substantial without ennui, and that means it should have good amounts of detail and logic, but don't overload the speech with details. So be selective in presenting information. Otherwise, you provide too much information and people get bored. So substantial without ennui, it means that you should have a speech that has enough substance without too many details which could lead to boredom. So that is also about finding a point of balance between how much information you provide and the issue of boredom. So let's move to the next one. He says that a speech should be powerful without haughtiness. Haughtiness is a reference to self-importance or arrogance. So if you are going to refer to achievements and the significance of your ideas, that could lead to a powerful speech, but don't have a speech that simply refers to your successes. If you have a speech that simply reflects your success, you could have a situation where people see you as being self-important or arrogant. So that's one of the things that we must think about. A speech should be powerful without haughtiness, and that's something to think about. There were several rules that were listed in the previous slide. I've explored 3 of those rules, but we could also scrutinize each of the claims as has been done in the previous slides, the previous 3 slides. So I believe that these slides are going to be shared with the attendees, and I suggest that you look at each of the rules that he puts forward and that you think about scrutinizing those rules as I've done about the previous 3 slides. So let me move on. Now, there's another thing that we must note. We must not expect that all speeches that are effective are morally sound. So there's a reference to Adolf Hitler, and there's a reference that Hitler was an effective speaker, although his concepts were immoral. That's something to bear in mind. Some people who are effective speakers do not express ideas that are morally sound. Adolf Hitler, as we all know, based his thinking on a sort of form of racial discrimination, and he spoke about that kind of thing. And so there's something important about that. We must realize that some people make speeches that are effective speeches. They are well organized and they inspire people, but they could also address immoral things. Simon Sebag Montefiore also makes the point that Adolf Hitler's speeches, if you read them, they are pretty banal, they are pretty ordinary. There's nothing remarkable about the ideas, but Adolf Hitler used to speak with a certain amount of passion, and that appealed to some of his audience. So it's the way that he spoke that appealed to the audience, and that's something that we must bear in mind. So if we are looking at the speeches of many people across history, sometimes we have to acknowledge that some of the speeches that were effective are not appealing to us in terms of our moral understanding of the world. So that's something just to bear in mind. Now, I'm going to address the topic of crafting a speech, and that is about the effort that one has to engage in preparing a speech. I will also say, before I move to the next slide, as you can see from my slides today, I have prepared this presentation. The slides capture a lot of ideas, something to think about. So let's look at the next slide, which is crafting a speech. So there's a lot of evidence that great speakers tended to work on their speeches for extended periods of time. Most people did not present speeches without preparation. And one of the well-known speakers from the 20th century, the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, he wrote his own speeches by hand, and he revised them up to 5 times. So he rewrote them, and he did that to ensure that they were effective. So he engaged in writing his speeches, and then he revised them. So that's something to think about in terms of the craft of writing a speech and then revising them. If you write a speech, one of the things that you might change is adding additional information, or you could revise the order of the points that you're making. So that's something to think about. Then consider how you, as a speaker, could craft your own speeches. How would you improve a speech that you have written down? That's something to think about. So, how would you improve a speech that you have written down? As I said, possibly you would write it on a Tuesday, and on the Wednesday, you might add additional ideas. The other thing that you could do is to revise the words that you are using for your speech. The actual choice of individual words. You might change your conclusion based on thinking over a period of time. So I think that it's important that you give yourself some time to prepare and then think about whether your speech makes sense. I will share with you I think it was last year when I was contacted by someone in the faculty, and they said, would I be willing to present a speech in the UJ library? And it seemed that there was a previous speaker who'd been requested to speak, and the person, for some reason, was not able to speak. So I was phoned by a senior member of the faculty, and the person said, could you speak on a certain topic? And I said, sure. And the person said, the speech is tomorrow. So I was given 24 hours to speak at the UJ Library, but fortunately it was a topic about which I had some knowledge. And so I put together a speech in less than 24 hours and presented it at the library. I think if I'd had more time, I would have done a better job. But I must also say, no one threw anything at me. So I guess I was reasonably successful. I would have preferred to have more time to speak. But as I say, the topic was not unfamiliar to me. So I was able to speak without a lot of preparation. But preparation means that you are able to organize your ideas, and you're also able to capture ideas in specific words. But there's also another thing that happens. There are some people who, like Churchill, worked on their speeches by themselves and do revision. But there are other people who use friends or family or others to to support them and give them commentary on their speech so that they can improve their speeches. So that is something to think about before you speak. Possibly you want to practice in front of somebody who is a friend who can give you critical commentary and say, well, this is good and that's something that you could improve. Alternatively, you could write your speech and give it to somebody to read, and they could comment on the ideas in the organization without addressing the idea of your presentation. So that's something to think about. Um, One person in Johannesburg that I know is somebody who, for some years, was a speechwriter for the president of South Africa. This person is very capable with language, both written and spoken. And this person effectively, for some years, made a career out of writing speeches. And that was an interesting thing. So there are people who are professional speech writers, and they normally have great skill in written and spoken language. Let us move to the next slide, which is still about crafting a speech. So, a speech to a particular audience would be somewhat different from the same topic for a different audience. For example, when addressing school children, the speaker would frame their ideas in a way that is accessible to school children. But if you are addressing the same topic to a group of academics, the speech would change because of the idea of a different level of knowledge and critical skills. So your audience would determine significantly the nature of your speech in terms of the ideas, the choice of language, and the sophistication of the speech that you present. So that is something to realize. If you are speaking to a particular audience, you need to target that audience and consider the way in which you would frame the ideas so that they are accessible to the audience. That's something that one must note. If we look at this, we get the statement: the best speakers have the ability to make ideas and aspirations come alive so that their audiences feel that they are part of something greater than themselves, part of a dream that may come true. So that's something to think about. Making ideas come alive. And we also have two examples from him. He speaks about JFK, John F. Kennedy's inaugural speech, and Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. And he says they are effective examples of this. It's very interesting to look at those two speeches because we have this idea of the individual linked to and associated with a bigger community beyond them. I always find Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech very effective. And one of the reasons that he's effective is that he engages with the audience and he gets us to think about possibilities in the world where people will not be judged in an unfair way. And he makes us think about a society in which fairness and generosity are possible. And the other thing about Martin Luther King's speech is that he uses repetition highly effectively. He uses this term, I have a dream, several times. And that involves the audience because as an audience, we think, what is our dream? And how do we connect with Martin Luther King's dream? And we get engaged in speculating about the type of society in which we would like to live. So that's an important thing about involving people beyond ourselves. As Montefiore says, the best speakers have the ability to make ideas and aspirations come alive so that their audiences feel that they are part of something greater than themselves, part of a dream that may come true. And JFK and Martin Luther King are examples of those people who spoke like that. And there are images of the two people. As you can see in the picture on the left, Martin Luther King is making a significant point, and he's using gesture to punctuate his statement. The photograph on the right is JFK, but that is a posed photograph. I think it is an official photograph for US records. So that's simply a photograph of him as a portrait. But the picture on the left is more animated, and we see in Martin Luther King a sense of energy and also a sense of purpose because he's making a point. And that is an important thing to note because he was a powerful orator. And I think he was very sound in his logic. And of course, the terrible thing is that both of these people had their lives cut short through assassination. This is a terrible thing to reflect on, but I think there are two photographs punctuate the ideas which we've been talking about, and also, as I say, the left photograph shows a sense of animation. So let us look at the next slide. And it's a topic which I mentioned in my introduction. The use of humor. Now, the use of humor can be an effective strategy in addressing an audience. The value is that human beings tend to engage in humor at times. People generally use humor in their daily lives. We appreciate humor, we engage with humor. So if you use humor in a speech, it's an example of connectedness to a human element. In other words, if you use humor, you connect to a whole lot of possible human elements, which is about being part of the human engagement, part of the human condition. But we must be careful to judge the use of humor on the basis of what is likely to be acceptable to the audience. Some types of humor might be lacking in acceptability to an audience. So you've got to be careful about how you use humor. Um, you could offend people if you make some jokes or refer to something as humorous, but if you um, use humor, note that you could offend people, and if people are offended, they might choose not to listen to you anymore. So that's something to note about um, the use of humor. There's another thing. Some members of an audience might not get the joke or jokes. So if you use humor and people don't laugh, or if they think, what was that all about? Then you've got a problem of humor as a failure. And that's something to think about, because humor should actually lighten the mood, and it should also pull people together. So if people don't get the humor, then you have to sort of explain the humor, and that is a kind of a failure in itself. So be aware that humor could be very successful, but it could also be a problem. Um, um, I recall years ago when Princess Diana died in a car wreck in Paris. Within days, there were people making jokes about that event. And the problem is if you are making jokes about death, uh, that can be a bit tasteless. And there are other topics which you possibly need to be careful of making jokes about uh, because some people could be offended. So that's something about humor. And that is why the heading is using humor or not. Um, so it can be effective, but it could be problematic. So let's move on to an example from my own experience. Years ago, I was working as a teacher in a school, and the school had an event in the evening, and I was asked to be the master of ceremonies. And I said, sure. The school had a primary school section and a high school section. I taught in the high school. And when I addressed the audience, which was a combination of primary school and high school, at one point I started telling knock knock jokes. And I was surprised by the positive response of the primary school kids who loved this knock knock stuff. When I said knock knock, they all shouted, "Who's there?" And then I carried on with the joke. And so it was very successful. But I did not know before I did that the kids would respond so positively. And as I say, this was a primary school group that responded positively. And I did not teach at primary school. So I found it a little unexpected, but it was a positive, unexpected moment. And that sort of primary school humor, like knock knock jokes, uh, is it can be very positive, as it turned out to be for me. Now we must carry on about preparation. If you are going to speak at an event, it is important that you have much of the speech prepared before you stand up to speak. I recognize that once you are speaking, there's a possibility of uh, making off the cuff comments, but I suggest that you do that once you've got the majority of the speech prepared. Um, Many people prepare for speaking by writing out the whole speech or typing it and printing it. Uh, what I've done today is I've got PowerPoint slides. I've also printed them so they are next to me, next to my laptop, and I can refer to them so that I know what the next one is. Some people use key cards or cue cards, which are small cards, which are not highly visible to the audience. And what that means is that central ideas are provided to the speaker, and the speaker adds commentary to the central ideas. So if you've got PowerPoint or cards, you put your main ideas there. But other people prepare for speaking by writing out the whole speech or typing it and printing it. At some international conferences where I've spoken, I've used PowerPoint, and I used PowerPoint as a guide about how to approach my topic. But other colleagues that I know from other universities have their whole speech written out or typed out, and they stand with their pages and no slides, and they speak to the audience and they read their speech. So there are different ways of doing this. The point is that you cannot get by without some preparation, whether it's addressing central ideas on slides or cards, or whether it's about putting every word in a sequence on a printed document and organize those ideas in paragraphs and so on. It's a choice that an individual will make. I also say to colleagues and students, I write articles in a certain way, which is I write them out by hand, and then I type them, and then I edit them. That is not what I say other people should do. What I will say to anybody who's wanting to write or speak is this: find your own way to be successful. Possibly you're going to write out the whole thing, or you're going to work with central points on cards or slides. So it's an important thing that you find your own way. And there's no single way that is the best way to do these things. So that's something to think about. Now I'll address preparation and the challenges of preparation. It is possible that you will be speaking at an event where there are several speakers. Possibly one of the other speakers might make an observation that links to your thinking or your topic. In this set of circumstances, you could refer to the other speaker when you present your speech. So if you are speaking at an event where there are several speakers, you might find yourself speaking after someone else who's got a similar topic, and you might want to link something from your speech to that person's speech. And that means that you have to prepare with a sense of flexibility, because it means that you are responding to something which you've just heard someone else speak about. And you might make a connection between your topic and your ideas and the other person who has spoken just before you. And that means a need for flexibility. And also active listening, so that you can link to other speakers. So let us look at word choice and diction. Earlier in the slides, I quoted Simon Sebag Montefiore, who used words like ennui and haughtiness. I personally tend not to use this type of word in my speaking or writing, because I recognize that difficult or unusual word choice can be a barrier to effective communication. I think that any speaker thinks about the choice of language, because some of the words that are used could be challenging for the audience. So that's something to think about in terms of your word choice. Use words that are accessible, but also note that you should not choose words that show that you might lack sophistication. So that's something to think about. Uh, if you're working in academic environments, the expectation is that the word choice is elevated, and there's a need to work with some level of sophistication in your word choice. So that's something to think about. And I recommend that you think about your individual word choice when you are going to speak, because uh, it can influence or determine how the audience responds to you. Now, there's also this thing about the use of quotes in a speech. There are many people who have made statements that capture the essence of an idea or concept. It's therefore tempting to use quotes to assist you in making your point. I agree that people have summarized the essence of ideas in some of their statements in the past, and maybe it's a good idea to use a quote that someone else has created, because it captures the essence of an idea. But the quotes must be carefully selected so that they address your ideas. So don't choose quotes that don't quite support what your topic is or what your argument is. Also, don't use too many quotes. Some people, when they speak, they say, that person said that, this other person said that, this other person said that, and they list a whole lot of statements which other people have said. And one of the problems with that is that you could lose your voice in the statements of other people. Remember, when you make a speech, it's important to have your voice foregrounded. So select your use of quotes, because too many will mean that your own voice and your own ideas become less evident. So that's something to think about. We want to hear the authentic voice that reflects yourself. So quotes can be very useful, but too many of them could result in the loss of the authentic voice. So that is something to think about. Let me move on. There's a need for coherence. In other words, each aspect of the speech should link to the other elements, and the argument that is presented should have a sense of logical development. In a speech, people often present an argument, and there needs to be logical development in that. And the argument must make sense, and the various elements of the speech should cohere. In other words, they should hang together and make sense. So that's something we must consider. Now, this is something just to note. I've given it the title, When the Short Speech Was Regarded as Better Than the Long Speech. Now, the Gettysburg Address is one of the most famous speeches in American politics, delivered by Abraham Lincoln in 1863. I think it was 19th November 1863. He was speaking at an event after the US Civil War. Lincoln was on the program, which included several speakers. One of the speakers, Edward Everett, spoke for more than 2 hours, and he was speaking before the president. Lincoln's speech was 10 sentences long and is remembered today as a statement of the value of democracy. And this is his conclusion. And some of us will know some elements of the speech where he speaks right at the end. He says, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." And that is interesting because that speech is revered in America because it's about an affirmation of the value of democracy, government of the people, by the people, for the people. And that is a very clearly crafted speech. And that was his conclusion. There is a debate about the speech because Lincoln did not write it out. He had notes, and there were journalists in the audience who wrote it down when he spoke. And I think there are 5 or 6 versions of the speech, but they have very similar features, and especially this conclusion about the value of government, of the people, by the people, for the people. So there's some disagreement about what was said exactly, but Lincoln, in 10 sentences, made a speech that is remembered today in America, and it's quoted in America and quoted internationally about government of the people, etc. And Edward Everett, who spoke for more than 2 hours, I don't think anyone quotes him. I I never bothered to quote him. I just know that he spoke for an exceptional time. And the short speech, which is substantial despite the limited number of words, gets us thinking. So that's something that we must think about. And this statement of Lincoln's conclusion takes us to, in a natural way, to talk about conclusions. The conclusion of a speech should not be abrupt. Instead, briefly summarize the ideas that you have addressed and also provide the audience with an overview of the ideas so that they become more familiar with the coherence of your argument. And then when you get to the end of the speech, the audience should not be thinking, what was that all about? Because if the audience is thinking that, it means that you have wasted the time of the audience, and you've also wasted your own time in addressing your topic. So that is the thing that you must consider in your conclusion. And I would suggest that you look at Lincoln's conclusion of the Gettysburg Address as a possible model for how to finish your speech. If you are addressing a speech, so I've just got one more slide, which is this. Thank you for attending this session. I hope that some of my ideas have been useful to you. And are there any comments or questions? I will stop sharing and there we go. I will stop speaking at this point, hand over to the people on RCD. Let's hear from you. Thanks very much. I hope that this was useful. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Robinson. This was indeed an insightful session, and thank you for preparing and presenting this present. I will now give the platform to the attendees to ask any questions that they have or to make any comments that they want to make. Let us please engage with Professor Robinson. I see one comment on the chat from Rogers Perry, and she says, "Thank you for an insightful session, Doc." So yes, we do thank you, Prof, for that insightful session. Can we please engage with Professor Robinson and ask questions and make comments? Okay, so I take it that there are no questions. I just see thank you messages coming through on the chat. I don't know if anyone wants to speak. I also see others are typing in on the chat, so we'll wait for that. But from my side, Professor Robinson, I think this presentation will really help the postgraduate students in presenting their research in different platforms. So this presentation will actually help us to structure how we can develop our public speaking, because as postgraduate students, one of the key and the important things is for us to be able to articulate and communicate our research. So in public spaces, in conferences, in those engagements that we have. So this presentation will surely come in handy when we have to prepare, and some of the tips that we took from this presentation that will help us to develop some confidence when we are presenting our research. So this was very insightful. Thank you. I'll go to the chat now. I see Tembo is saying, no questions from me. Out of curiosity, is there a speech club at UJ? From my side, I don't know of any. I don't know if you do, Professor Robinson. Is it directed at Prof or at us? I'm not too sure.
I'm not sure. I don't think there is such a thing, but I think there's a possibility that someone could start something like a speech club or debating club. I think. Thanks very much.
It's true. I've never heard of any, but then I think from the arts and culture, maybe we can find out from there if they do offer, and then if there is, then we'll surely communicate what they have said. But at the moment, I also don't know anything of the speech club. There's another comment, very impactful examples that helps with preparing a speech, definitely. And also there's another comment that says, thank you, the session was very beneficial, from Sibono Kuhle, and also from Lisibe, great session, thank you. So I think just thank you messages are pouring in, and everybody found the session insightful. So in the absence of questions or comments, then I think we can conclude the session. And Professor Robinson has shared his details. So if any one of you wants to get in contact with him, then they can see the details on the slides that we're also going to share now on the Moodle community. So another comment is saying, appreciate the session and the resources shared. It's an important skill to learn, definitely. Public speaking is always an important skill to learn. Thank you, sir, and thank you for the wonderful session. So everyone, Prof, appreciates the session and your efforts in giving this presentation. So there are no questions, just beautiful comments coming in. But in the absence of questions, then we can conclude the session. Just a reminder for everyone to please complete the survey form. I'm going to put it again on the chat for the last time. There we go. Can we please complete the survey form? And we have another session, the last session later on at 1 o'clock. So please join us for that as well. I think this is the last session for the themes. So following this will be the writing sessions and the consultations with the writing consultants. So the session at 1 o'clock is about responding to feedback. So as a postgraduate student, obviously, when you're busy with your research and you're sending to your supervisor, there's an engagement that is happening and some tips on how you can, receive the feedback, how you can go about responding to feedback. So that will be our last session for the day, and that will be our last session for this pre-reg program. And then, as I've said, following the sessions will be the consultations and the writing sessions, which of course, please look out also on the Moodle community announcements, because we're going to also give more information how that will go about the writing sessions and everything. So more details will still be communicated. So, okay, I see another comment. Is there any feedback regarding alternative writing sessions for those students who are presently studying part-time due to having a full-time job? Yes, as I've stated now, that the communication will be done through the Moodle community. So there's a communication that is still happening, but then once everything has been finalized, then we will definitely communicate via the Moodle community. So please look out for the announcements on the Moodle communities. So at the moment, we are also working on uploading all the Moodle communities. As I've mentioned, that is really we are being delayed a bit because of the number of uploads that we do on our YouTube channel per day. So it's limiting us. So we have to do it slowly, bit by bit. So, but then I think by the end of this week, we will have uploaded all of the sessions, because this is the last session. And in the afternoon one is the last session anyway. So we will have some time to catch up and upload all the recordings, because it's, as I've mentioned yesterday, it's limiting us on the number of the videos we can upload per day. And we're not only uploading for this community, we have other communities as well that we need to upload videos for. So it's a slow progress, but then we will have all the recordings uploaded. And thank you everyone for attending this session, and thank you for those people who have been consistent in attending all our sessions. We really appreciate this, and we really hope that you find all of the sessions beneficial for your pre-registration year. And at the end of this all, you will have a well-structured research proposal, and you will have attained some skills also, such as public speaking, that will help you in communicating your research. So thank you very much. And if there are no questions or any comments, I will conclude the session. Thank you very much, Professor Robinson, and thank you to all the attendees.
Thanks very much, and good luck to everyone with their studies. I wish you all great success. Bye now.
Bye. Enjoy your day further.